Hey YouTube, how's it going? Today we're going to be creating this Paludarium. The first thing we're going to need to do is make a housing for the pump. What I'm using here is just foam craft board you can find at any local craft store. So to start off, I'm marking off the center line so I know where to make the cut down the center to fold the piece in half to create the tower. Now that I know where my center line is, I make a nice gentle cut down the center, not cutting all the way through. That way when you gently apply pressure, now you have one piece. Now here I'm pressing a little bit harder so I can make the cutouts for the water to pass through. Foam is really easy to work with and really cheap. In case you mess up, you can just make another piece. And once I have those cut out, I'm going to take my silicone, lay a nice bead around the holes, and lay down the plastic mesh just to make sure no large particles go through into the pump. Now to attach it, I'm going to put silicone along the edges and gently put it into place, trying not to smear it, which I end up doing anyways. Now I'll take some more silicone and just do the edges to make sure I don't get any water bypassing the screens. The next step is to build up the base for the land area. Here I'm putting some silicone down and I'm going to put some filter mat on top. And I'll continually stack these until I get the desired height I want. I like using filter mat over other materials because it's firm enough to hold whatever you stack on top of it, and it's obviously biological media. So here now I'm adding another piece of foam board, just make sure everything's nice and level. Another good thing about using foam is you can carve it really easy with a nice sharp razor. Now the stone I'm working with today is called pagoda stone. I really like the look of it. Unfortunately, it can be a hassle to work with because it has the lines in it, so it's very directional. Now, this is another piece I have pre-selected. It's going to be where the water comes out of the pump housing and trickles down. This is a rock I already had pre-selected. Because of its shape, I wanted the water to split around both sides of it. For this stone, instead of hot glue, I opted to use the tissue paper and super glue. Now once I had my rocks all set around the edges, I got the silicone out and I started to fill in the gaps between the foam board and the rocks. This is to make sure that the water stays up where I want it to and doesn't just spill behind the rocks. Now that I have the lower level set, I can start working my way up. Fortunately, the rock where the water is going to come out on top of has some really big gaps, and silicone alone won't fill it. So I just took some scrap pieces of foam, filled in those gaps, and put the silicone on top of it. And now that I have these here, I'm going to start filling in the gaps. A lot of these stones I had set out already. I knew where I wanted to place them. I know the silicone's kind of ugly, but I'm going to cover it up here in a minute with some sand, which is the first time I've ever used sand for this. The grains are really too small to try to push into the silicone, and they never really hide the silicone because of that. Now after I covered everything, I let it set for about 2 hours and then brushed it off. Once the rocks were all set, I started getting the pump ready to go. Here I'm putting the pump down in the housing and using a small pair of tweezers to poke a hole where I think the center is. I actually got lucky and it was the center. And then I took a hole saw about the same diameter as the 90, pushed it through. And here I took a diffuser. Both of these pieces I actually 3D printed just for this. Now once I had those in place, I covered it in silicone. I did not silicone the 90 though. I want to be able to pull the pump out if I have to. So once the silicone was down, I put some cocoa coir on there. While I was waiting for it to dry, I decided I was going to fill in these gaps, make them look a little better. So for this, I took sand, poured it in the areas, cleaned up where I didn't want the sand, Once I had the sand all ready, I went over it with super glue. Super glue is really good. It's non-toxic when it dries, and it hardens really nicely. So this way the water is not going to wash the sand away if I just put it loose on top. Then once I had the super glue down, I did go over a little bit more sand. And about 20 minutes later, this is the result. It hardens really quick, and it's virtually invisible, so it still leaves a nice natural look and feel. Now, about 2 hours later, after the silicone hardened enough, I went back and started adding in the driftwood. These pieces I'm putting down are really tight to the rock, so kind of the same principles when I put the rocks down and put the silicone there is to keep water from going underneath them and behind them and forcing the water all in one direction. So from here I just continue to add another piece, put some silicone down where the contact points were, but then I did eventually go back over it and add a little bit more silicone just to make sure it didn't come loose later on. And of course, topping it all off with some cocoa coir. I'm using cocoa coir here, not the sand, because this is above the water line, so it just looked more natural. Now you can probably tell I'm using just little amounts of silicone. I don't want to go too big with it and make it look too noticeable. Now while I was waiting for the silicone to dry on the wood, I decided I'd just fill this rest of this area in with sand and super glue. I really didn't know how the water was going to come out and if it would wash away any loose sand I put down, so. Again, I'm just soaking it all the way through, and then I'll go over and add a light dusting of sand. And once again, about 20 minutes later, this is the result. Now, let's get the water in here. So the first thing I wanted to test here was the sand, and look at that. It's not going anywhere. Don't have to worry about it ever washing away. And the second part of this water test is going to be the pump and see how everything flows. Hopefully I don't have to do too much adjusting. Yeah, luckily I had to do none. It came out perfect. On to the next part. So for planting, I am going to put some plants in here in the water. So the first thing I'm doing is laying down a layer of aqua soil. This is Fluval stratum. And then on top of that, I'm going to place the matching sand. This is a bigger grain. It's not going to float around like the other stuff I was using. So once I get it all leveled out, I added a few more pieces of pagoda stone in the water. This ties the land and the water together a little bit more. I didn't want to put too many in here and make it too crowded. So here I'm backfilling a bit in an empty space so I can put some moss here. Now this is some water wicking material. It's not Hygralon, it's a knockoff, but it works just as good. Now the moss I'm using here is mood moss. I think it's going to tie in really well. Kind of going for the natural spring bubbling up onto the ground look. Now here I decided to change it up a little bit and put some cushion moss down. So it didn't take long for me to sit back and look and realize that the middle was just a little too empty, so I ended up adding another piece of driftwood. Now that I think the hardscape's all done, I'm going to go ahead and start planting in the water. This is Pogostemon helferi. I think that's how you pronounce it. Terrible with Latin. Now these should grow much bigger, not real big, but they'll look real nice in here. And once again, I'm going to use some dwarf hair grass. I like using it in these setups because it kind of looks like a marginal plant, kind of at the water's edge. And it, just like grass, it does grow runners and it will spread nicely. Now back up in the land area, I thought it was missing a little something, so I decided to add some oak leaf creeping fig. It should spread nicely. Hopefully it doesn't get too out of control. Have to keep an eye on it. Now to top off the water area, Salvinia minima. One of my favorite floating plants, especially when the roots come in. So here we go. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.